Hello, Saints. Today I want to talk to you about, the Bible talks about an end. Jesus is talking about all these different things that you're going to see in the end times. And then he says the end is not yet. And then other scriptures, talk about, they'll be talking, the men of God will be talking in the Bible. And then they say the end is not yet. Or, there is an end of age. Okay. So, we know time as it travels around, the sun, and it rotates on its axis. So, I'm gonna tell you about a vision that I had one time. So the Lord I was sleeping, and all of a sudden the Lord sent me a dream, a vision, and in this vision, the Lord said, "Come here, come here." He's in this room, and He says, "Come here, come here." He goes, "I'm going to show you something." And so I said, okay. And so as I got closer, I seen them touching like up in the air, and it was like a hologram, like Star Trek. You would see like a computer screen up in the air, and he's touching the computer screen, and I see like a map of the stars. And I said, wow, that's a map of the stars. And he's going, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he says, "You see this blood red moon?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And he goes, "This moon will hit your moon." And so I'm like, wow, I said, "Show me the coordinates, show me the coordinates." And so I woke up, and, I was sweating. I had a very powerful dream, like liquid, very, very real. And so I went to use the bathroom, came back, and sometimes when the Lord wants to show you something, He takes you right back into that dream, that vision. He wants you to understand it. So He takes me right back into that dream, and He says, "Come here." He's in that room, and He says, come here, I'm going to show you something." And so he's taking his left hand, and he's touching, this computer screen. And as he touches the top left, all of a sudden he touches it. He says, "Come here, I'm going to show you something." He takes touches that top left of the computer screen, and it's like, I'm gone, I'm right where he touched. And as I'm flying where he touched, I looked out the corner of my eye, and I seen our sister sun returning with its orbiting planets and moons. And he said, "Do you see this planet? This planet will hit your planet." And so, I told you how I read the Bible. I was like, "Show me the coordinates, show me the coordinates." And so I woke up, and, I tell you how I read the Bible. I close my eyes, I reach into the Bible, and there it is. There's all the scriptures. He led me to all the scriptures. I said, "Lord, you got to talk to me." So He leads me to, a lot of the scriptures, in the book of Revelation, it says, every high tower will fall down, every island, will disappear. He shows me, the great earthquake. Shows me, in Isaiah, Isaiah's seen the end of age. He's seen where it says the sun, and I think it was Isaiah 13, says the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations, or whatever, will fall from the sky. It will darken the skies. So there's, and then, in the book of Zechariah, it talks about fireballs raining down on, the unrepentant Gentile armies as they fight against the Lord, at the Battle of Armageddon. And then Peter talks about, the earth is, the sky, the atmosphere is going to roll up like a scroll. Sky is going to roll up like a scroll. And it's going to like crack open with a loud noise or some, that's how the end happens, with fire. So there's many scriptures that the Lord was showing me that when the day of the Lord comes, when I'm going to tell you how I understand it. Okay, so here's how I understand the day of the Lord. So once the war starts, Israel will be attacked with chemical weapons. Okay, this is noisome and grievous source. Okay, then the U.S.-Iran war. This is the red horse rides out in the book of Revelation. Okay, and then once the red horse rides out, there's going to be, the U.S.-Iran war. Then there's going to be a war at sea. Once we have that war at sea, then, 1/3 of the ships or the souls are going to die. It's going to be a huge war at sea. Okay. And then, total destruction of every Gentile nation on earth. That's nuclear and chemical warfare. Every nation on earth gets destroyed. And then, there's other prophecies in there. Super volcano goes off in the United States. Okay. And then for 5 months, as that super volcano is going off for 5 months in the United States, people's going to gnaw their tongues and they're going to wish they were dead. They just want to, for 5 months, the volcanic ash gets in your throat and it gnaws your tongue like shards of glass. So there's many Bible prophecies that will happen. It's just you have to have a understanding of it. And then after, let's move forward. So after the war starts, God is calling his people back to Israel. It says in Jeremiah 30, Revelations 12, Isaiah. There's many places that talk about, return back to Israel and let the Lord defend you there. Okay, so as God's, Christian, people called by his name, as the Christians are returning back to Israel, they're going to enter into the wilderness. They're going to return back to Israel. As that's happening, all these different prophecies are happening. Okay, now, once God is done chastising his children, he says, I will draw a line, I will cut off, a righteous remnant, and then the worldly Christians. Once this is taking place, once God chastises his children, he says, my sword will chase the sinners of my people. So as God lifts up his hedge of protection, the war starts. He separates worldly Christians from the remnant Christians like he's done in the past. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So God is perfect, so as what he does, what he did in the past is a model of what he will do next. So the whole book of the Old Testament is an exact copy of the book of Revelation. Okay, so as the Christians are returning back to Israel, God's calling them back to the land, then he's going to say, okay, that's it. I've chastised my children. They put these idols and distractions on their heart, the false biblical teachings, all these different things, the great falling away from God, 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3. So once that great falling away, God chastises his children, then what happens is, God says, okay, he handed his rod over to the Antichrist. He started Worldwide War III. Now, once that's done, once God is done chastising his children, then he goes after those, he avenges their innocent spilled blood. He goes after the wicked that touched his children. Don't touch God's children. Don't touch God's people. So after he goes after those, those armies, he rains fireballs down. Then that's the day of the Lord when, God avenges their blood. As the day of the Lord is happening, fireballs rain down upon the armies, the unrepentant. A planet hits Earth, a planet hits us, and then a blood red moon destroys our moon. Pieces of our moon fall into the oceans, creating 1,000-foot tsunamis, destroying coastal cities worldwide. So once all of that is happening at the day of the Lord, this is the end of age. Okay, apparently, when you read the scriptures, it says the earth will be removed. Isaiah says the earth will be removed like a cottage. He says the earth will stagger like a drunkard. different places in the Bible describe, bad times for Earth. The oceans will dry up. The Earth will, the gravitational pull of all these planets passing by Earth. It says the sun, the moon, the stars will be darkened. And then it says a great earthquake like you have never seen will basically, like crack, the Earth's crust. So as all of that day of the Lord is happening, I mean, you might as well say time stops. You might as well say that's the end of age, So anyway, I'm sorry to be rambling on and everything, but I need to put together, a basic, like PowerPoint presentation or something. Or if you visit my website, you'll see under, I think, the video section where it talks about, God's next judgments, or, talks about the seven bowls, the vials, and the trumpets. It talks about the seals, the trumpets, the vials, and it lays out what each event is. So if you go to my website, www.end-of-age.com, you're going to see how each prophecy happens. Major solar flare is going to hit Earth, and it's going to wipe out all, communications and all that stuff. The super volcano is going to go off. A foreign army is going to attack United States. All kinds of things. Okay. So, but now, know in your heart that, always remember this, God's love for us far outweighs his anger against us. Yes, God's angry because his people, our hearts are far from God. Okay? So our hearts are far from God. God is very upset, very angry that, that we fell away from him, serving idols, distractions, things from this world, the works of our fingers and our hands. He's so upset that, he's calling to us with all these obvious signs, Leviticus 26, Hosea 4, Amos 4, mass animal deaths, severe weather, droughts, floods. So he's calling to us saying, come back to me. But, God's love for us far outweighs his anger against us. So, if if you see the signs of the end times, if you see them, the floods, the droughts, the severe weather, the recent earthquake and volcanic activity, strange trumpet sounds, signs in the sky, if you see the military buildup happening around the world, if you see threats of nuclear war, if you see all of these things happen, the riots and the lawlessness, if you see all of humanity, just the moral decay and decline, then in your heart that God has been calling to us with all of these signs, these different signs. So you might as well just get right with God right now. Just get right with God right now. Just start, getting things off of your heart, off of your chest. To say, the Bible says in Isaiah, it says, just come reason with me, so just go and start pouring your heart out to God. Say, God, I know that, the end is coming. I see, look at, like Texas, these kids were at a camp, and Christian kids were at a camp, and all of a sudden, they drowned. They are eyewitnesses to what God is doing. The whole world is without excuse. They see the wildfires, the droughts, the flood. The whole world is without excuse. Just because they have forgotten God and his ways doesn't mean that God is not calling to us. God is calling to us. So the whole world is without excuse. God is not going to stop. He there's a point when God says, you know what, my people do not regard my works. And he's going to call to us with his sword. Now, when he whips out his sword, when he takes his sword out of the sheath, he hands it over to the Antichrist. He hands it to the devil. Okay? And what happens is, God lifts up his hedge of protection, hands it over. He hands his rod to the Antichrist. He starts worldwide war. And when he starts that, once the war starts, that's it. That's it. It's not going to finish until God stops it, at the Battle of Armageddon, the day of the Lord. But anyway, if you want to read more, go to my website, www.endofage.com. And I think I put a link on my channels, YouTube channel, Facebook channel, TikTok, Instagram. If you want to learn more, just ask the Holy Spirit. I told you how to hear from God. Close your eyes, reach into the Bible, and say, hey, I have a question concerning your word. Please talk to me about this. And you'll notice he answers you 100%. You read the Bible like this for 10 days. You will not read the Bible any other way. Okay, so moving forward, hey, if you guys want to learn more, go to my website. If you want to see more videos like this, then, like, follow, subscribe, and I'll try not to ramble on and give you little bits and pieces, but I'll try to put together a PowerPoint presentation when I get a little time on the weekends. I'll try to put together a PowerPoint presentation so what's coming next. Okay, in 2026, everything that the Lord has been telling me, 2026 is when it all starts. Okay, that's when Israel gets attacked with chemical weapons after the wheat and barley harvest, and then the U.S. goes to war against Iran. And think about it. Who's Iran's allies? Russia, China, North Korea, all the Islamic, states. And once that happens, then a war at sea. So all of that is starting very, very, very shortly. God tells me all the time, don't put a time on it. So, I'm sorry to put a time on it, but I believe with all of my heart, I'm just telling you, I believe with all my heart, it's going to happen 2026, about at the, right there at the beginning of summer, after the wheat and barley harvest. So you guys need to prepare. Tell your friends and family, are you Jesus ready? Can't you see God is up to something? God is going to do something very, very big, so like, follow, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. You guys have a great day.